Thank you for joining this open learning webinar convened by First Nations Affairs. My name is Cheryl Reddy, and it's a real pleasure on behalf of Social Enterprise Australia to acknowledge the cultural wisdom, authority, knowledge and care in this Zoom room today. We're really grateful to Bec Blurton from First Nations Affairs for bringing this learning opportunity to life in collaboration with Raylene Bellotti and Tyson McEwen. We do have apologies today from another speaker, Ben Ainsworth, who couldn't make it today. Thank you all for sharing your time and expertise with us today. Social Enterprise Australia hosts these webinars as part of the Social Enterprise Development Initiative, which is funded by the Federal Department of Social Services. Our aim is to create a space for change makers across the social impact community to share knowledge and experiences that help strengthen connection and collective care across sectors. At Social Enterprise Australia, we've definitely got work to do to unlearn colonial ways of seeing and doing. And we know this is critical work for all of us across the sector if we really want to contribute to building an economy that puts people and planet first. So we're really excited to learn from all of you in today's session. Before I hand over to Bec, Raylene and Tyson, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and careholders of the unceded lands from which we're all joining today. I'm privileged to be on the lands of the Wadi Wadi people of the Dharawal language group. I pay my respects to elders past and present who've cared for country and community for thousands of years, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander attendees online today, acknowledging that your presence holds over 65,000 years of systems thinking and relational care for people, place and planet. And with that, I'll hand over to you, Bec.
Thanks, Cheryl. Hi, everyone, and hi, Tyson and Raylene. Thanks for joining. We're hosting this conversation at a critical inflection point, both globally and nationally. The climate crisis is accelerating, and with it, the urgency to reevaluate the governance, investment, and legal systems that shape our collective response. In Australia, climate adaptation and transition efforts are increasingly intersecting with First Nations land, rights, and interests, whether through renewable energy development, nature-based solutions, or environmental markets. Yet institutional arrangements remain poorly equipped to engage with Indigenous governance on its own terms. These dynamics undermine both the integrity of climate action and broader pursuit of social justice. As governments and industries shift toward ESG-aligned approaches, key questions emerge. Who is defining the frameworks that we all adopt and use? What assumptions underpin our models of value, risk, and reform? And how do we centre governance that is grounded in country? This session brings those questions into sharper focus. It's an opportunity to hear from leaders working across law, finance, policy and cultural governance, and to explore how we move from consultation towards structural change. When we refer to climate in this session, it'll be all-encompassing of ESG, sustainability, traditional ecological knowledge, and well-being. So we're taking a holistic approach to the conversation today. Let's get started. Raylene and Tyson, from your perspective, what does real climate leadership look like when it's grounded in First Nations governance and worldview? Raylene, we'll kick off with you.
Yeah, well, First Nations people, first of all, need to be at the table. You know, we've got to be at the table. We've got to be, you know, listened to. It's got to be co-design. We need to make sure that we're inclusive on everything that's happened on our country. The days are gone where we just sit back. You know, I've seen this with mining for many, many years where we never had those opportunities. And there's all these big mines on our country, all over Australia. I mean, I've got a big mine sitting on my country that's gone bust. And, you know, we've got no say. And that's pretty sad. So I think, you know, it's really important to make sure that we're at the table and we're involved in the co-design, and the governance must be first priority, embedded into whatever project is happening on our country. We've got to be at the table.
Tyson.
Thanks, Raylene. I'll echo those thoughts as well, but from a action, for me, the corporate perspective from a governance is that you have to turn your mind to the issue or your mind to the risk. You just cannot ignore one interested party. And adding to Raylene about seeing First Nations people other than just the general stakeholders, you have to look at them as equal partners to the project or to the item that you're trying to do, because you add in that experience and that knowledge, but also you're leveling up the partnership as well. You're removing, the other. You're actually bringing them, because you actually are operating on country. You need to understand that environment, what are the challenges out there, and no copy and paste approach can be done. So it's actually investing the time into these communities that you're going to operate in or are operating in.
That's great. And what do you think is missing from the current national and global climate conversation that we need to call into the room?
Well, I think obviously it's missing having us included. I mean, that's important that, when we just don't seem to be at a table, we're not aligned as well. There's no really big cooperation across Australia. I mean, there seems to be lots of players in this space, but there's not enough collaboration and alignment. And I think, we need to get that up and running. That's really important. Because, many people don't know what's going on. It's just, out in the community, people are unaware. It's only certain people that know what's happening. So there needs to be some sort of a regulatory body that's overseeing this for First Nations people as well, to make sure that, we are inclusive and we are at the table and we are going to get equity into these projects. This is really important.
I think for me, what's missing is the change in perspective and about how we view First Nations people in sort of the ecosystem. And if you look at the Joint Standing Committee at the Northern Australia and their inquiry into the engagement of traditional owners and the economic development of Northern Australia, we'll have good long titles for national inquiries. They looked into this sort of economic sort of development, and one of the key issues that the First Nations or the traditional owners were echoing was that seeing native title rights or economic development on country as some sort of encumbrance on projects, because we have to adhere to the traditional owners. But we must challenge ourselves to change that perspective, and that viewing that traditional owner perspectives and knowledge is equally as important to including, instead of we have to consult them and it's going to delay the project by 6 months. Well, if it does, then so be it. And as I said before, you have to invest the time in those communities, and you have to sit down and understand. It's their knowledge as well, but you think you're going to just rock up and have a cup of tea and you're going to tell me everything about the country. No, that takes time. It takes trust in that respect. So I feel like it's the change in perspective, but how you get that perspective is investing that time.
I might add, it's about building those relationships and being transparent and, making sure that our people are included. I mean, we've been on our people have been on the country for thousands of years. They know that, the country back to front. So, why wouldn't you want to be able to work with the traditional owner people? It makes it a lot easier for your major projects, and in partnership, in co-design, everything, every step of the way, it needs to be, working with our people. It's got to be a fair system.
And we've all had this conversation as well. I think, whenever climate is mentioned out there, there's a heavy focus on emissions or renewables, but obviously it's much more than that. It's country, it's community well-being, it's, we talk about a just transition. And what does that mean? How do you make that inclusive? There's heavy investment going into infrastructure for renewable projects, but how do you include all the different communities? And I think we've all agreed at different times, there's a real disconnect between, in this country particularly, between the likes of Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra, and then the rest of Australia. And so how do you bridge that gap? For me, just to kind of chime in on this topic, I've sat on the task force for inequality and social related disclosures this year, looking at conceptual foundations. It's a framework, obviously, to support disclosures in corporations on inequality and social related impacts. And it's very much focused on people and well-being. We've seen climate disclosures, which has now been mandatory in Australia. We've seen nature-related disclosures. So this is the third of the others. And for me, the conversation has been trying to elevate First Nations rights and interests, and separate our unique connection to country and one another, our long histories, our traditions, our culture, our kinship structures, our songlines, all of those things. And what are the different mechanisms, or what are the approaches or the protocols required to meet First Nations rights and interests, where they're at, when it comes to designing policy, when it comes to legislation, when it comes to developing, agreements. We're talking renewables between proponents and traditional owners. What are the processes? So, yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for recognising First Nations with unique rights and interests, rather than just another stakeholder to engage in a process, in a wider development process. And I think when you talk climate, it goes well beyond just emissions, carbon credits, carbon offset programs, or major renewable projects. I think there's a lot more to be considered. So yeah, that for me is missing from the national and global conversations, I think. Next question. How does your connection to country inform your view on climate risk and opportunity? Tyson, we'll start with you this time.
Okay. Feel like for me, originally from South Hedland, Port Hedland, and I go back home twice a year. And I think I don't appreciate the amount of mining that happens up there. Like, it is truly crazy. The rail carts all day, every day, and they're just carting like the iron ore just back and forth. The ships are rolling through to see it, and just the volume of how much iron ore that is coming through. And I'm not there saying, how much emissions is that creating, but you start to ask, when does this end, or what's next? Because we can't dig our way out of this. As much as we want heaps of iron ore, and it's good. And then you got the green iron, which I didn't know about until I looked into it, but it's the same, but sort of different sort of thing. We still requires all that infrastructure. And I mention that is because you look at the footprint of a landscape of Hedland now, and it's just all mining. Like, it's just crazy on fishing spots that we used to go to, we can't access anymore. The dirt road to a camping spot has a new railway line there, so now we have to find another way over it. And so it's sort of that cut off access, even though it's all legal and it's fine, but you're not informed anymore. You don't know what's going on. Just on the road, next thing you know, there's a new railway line, and you can't go over it. You got to try and find a safe way to it. And so seeing all of that, it's sort of in your back of your mind about, well, what is really happening for this town and for the community? Because one day the iron ore is going to run out. So what's going to be left for them? And I think about, I'm lucky enough to have a very beautiful niece and up there and, you know, what they can do and contribute to the community up there. And so my connection is deeply rooted in about it. It's more about protection, about the mining is going to happen, but how can we coexist? And even though the mines were there a couple of decades ago, doesn't mean those practices and policies have to remain the same. It can change, it can evolve with the need. So I feel like for me, my connection sort of shapes me about what can be done much better, but also looking forward to the opportunities ahead and seizing those opportunities as well. Just because it hasn't been done before doesn't mean that it can happen.
That's great.
Yeah. Well,
Raylene, what are your thoughts on risk and opportunity?
My country spans from Northampton, if you know where that is, up the Midwest, up right up to the Shark Bay, up my husband's area, up to Shark Bay where I grew up. And Kalbarri is in my country, and it's a beautiful, known as a national park. Shark Bay is World Heritage, so we've got some amazing countryside. We're actually negotiating at the moment, our traditional owner group, with a hydrogen renewable energy project in a beautiful Murchison area near Kalbarri, which is, you know, beautiful country. And, you know, many of our family are worried about that and concerned about that because, you know, it's a significant area to us. And, you know, and like Tyson said, you know, we see all these roads change and, you know, all your favourite little spots that you want to go to. And we have no say in this. We're not told, we're not informed, but we just rock up and then, you know, oh, we can't get through here now because now they've got a track through here and whatever. But look, I understand, you know, and I know that we have to have progress, and I know that you know, climate change is around the corner and we need to do things and we need to act. But yes, we do need to be at the table. We need to be working closely with this, with everybody that's involved, because it's important for us to be a part of it. So the risks are, you know, that if we're not involved, you know, things could go pear-shaped. You know, we don't want to see another Juukan Gorge, you know, disaster. So we've got to be at the table. We've got to be there working. I mean, we've got, like I said, all these amazing spots. But we also, you know, I also know that we need a future for our people. You know, with this big renewable, like I want to make sure, you know, it works both ways. You know, if we're part of it, you know, we're at the table, we're co-designing, we're part of it, have equity ownership in it, we can have a say and we can make sure we're protecting country, you know, so have a voice. Because like Tyson said, all these mines in the Pilbara, they're just there. And it amazes me that one of the big mines has got a pit where they've got a graveside right in the middle of the pit. They just bulldozed down roads. You know, they moved rock art, you know, that was all moved many years ago. They shifted it all and then moved it back. Like, you know, as Aboriginal people, we don't go and move cemeteries or churches, you know.
Gosh, yeah.
I mean, so, you know, it's important that we're there, and it's got to be like the free, prior and informed consent, but it's got to be our people need to be understood. You know, they need to understand what's going on. It can't be just, you know, coming out to a group of people and talking to them. It's got to be across the border community, and really that engagement is really important to make sure that we're getting out there to and the people understand, and it's really communicated well so that they understand. But, you know, we're not opposed to it. Like, our people need jobs, we need business opportunities, you know, we need these renewables because they're going to be better for the climate. So we're not opposed to it, but just so long as we're a part of it.
Yeah, and I think that's the risk aspect. Going back to that connection to country, you know, a lot of our people, especially in some of these regional remote areas, know the land and have all of those, like you've both mentioned, having sites, having ceremonial sites, or just traditions in our families, in our kinship structures, and then all of a sudden not having access to them. But I think for a lot of the consultation that I've done through our org, looking at sector pathway programs, looking at different biodiversity or regen programs, and working with local groups who know the stories of, you know, trees or local nature and what are the seasons, and taking all of that into account rather than just constantly extracting, But I think one of the aspects of that, and this has been on my mind a lot lately, is that identity makes up for a lot of our well-being as a people, our unique identity and that connection. And when we lose that, or if that's closed off, or if we're, excluded again, like we have been a lot throughout the history of this country, it keeps impacting our identity, and it keeps kind of the snowball effect of these social issues and the well-being. So for me, like that's the risk, and I think the opportunity is the opposite of that. We need partnerships. The world is changing rapidly. We're needing innovative solutions because climate change is happening. It's now, it's been happening. It's eroding away not only our land, our connection, our people. And so where are the partnership opportunities to work together, to co-design programs, to co-design land management, to co-manage land?
Yes.
And we're seeing that popping up. There's some great programs here in New South Wales where I am at the moment. We've got partnerships happening throughout WA, especially the southwest, because soil there is atrocious. And so you are seeing groups partner with local Noongar mob and looking at regeneration programs, which is great. But I just, back to that point of the world is rapidly changing. We need more. Like, it needs to be fast tracked. It needs to be accelerated. And I think that's the opportunity, and tapping into traditional ecological knowledge. Like, there's so much there.
I think it's also important to make sure that we are on the run now. We're getting prepared. It's like, don't come to us when you're about to kick off your project. Get us prepared. I don't want to hear the story where we're building this big renewable and, hey, you guys, you don't have any experience. You can't work on this project. So it's given us some time to be ready as well. So that we can start getting our people trained up and ready to work. And same with the businesses. It's important to understand, well, what is the business opportunities on these projects? So our people can gear up and get prepared, because we're always left behind the 8 ball. And when it comes to the kickoff, Aboriginal people rock up and then they're told, oh, okay, sorry, but you don't have the experience, you don't have the skills, you're in the wrong business. So it's, having that partnership is crucial, so that we can be prepared and we're at the table, we know what's coming, and we're getting ourselves ready. And if we need to get capability partners to help us, whatever, we can do that. And equity is the only way, for our future. In Canada, they're doing that over there, and look, it's lifting those people in leaps and bounds. It's time for our people to reap some rewards too, so we can create some generational wealth to lift our people out of poverty. Seriously, like a lot of our people, majority of them are in poverty, and close the gap is not going to work without creating some wealth to lift them up. So these opportunities are, we welcome them, but we've got to be at the table and in partnerships, as you say.
Yeah, agreed. We've touched on it a little bit already, but any more thoughts around what else we lose if land is only seen through an economic or an emissions lens?
I look back and think many years ago, I lived in Marble Bar, and living in the Pilbara, which, Tyson's from, a lot of that law and, culture stuff is still there. And that really saddens me when our people aren't involved, because, that cultural connection to land is so important to some of those people. If they're not a part of it and understanding and making sure it isn't destroying parts of their significant sites and areas that are really important to them, I think that's going to be pretty sad. That is key, because it's like anything. It's like any religion, any ethnic group that follows their practice. They've got their cultural practices. It's really important to make sure that that's maintained and adhered to.
I think for me, what you lose is once you start to put monetary value on the land, is that it is a spiritual connection. It is a living thing, and so when you try to monetize all this land in value, it's not a value. It's uneconomic. Just because it doesn't have any iron ore. it doesn't mean it's not valuable. It's just it doesn't have what you're looking for, and it could have many other things. And I feel like once that economic lens happens, people miss out. As I was saying before, there's a lot of iron ore projects happening. There's a lot of mining, and there's going to come a point where mining tenements are going to be very hard to find, and there's the availability of it. It's no longer just going to exist, and so there's going to be a competitive process, and this means that corporate behaviour will have to change, because the First Nations people will be able to decide who they want to work with and who they don't want to work with as well. That's the opportunity. They're trying to be a good partner in these frameworks and projects in a competitive market, because if not, you're going to be disowned. You're not going to be able to operate in that area, because you won't have any say. And a very small thing I'll add as well. I remember ages ago, so don't quote me on this, but I heard that for an entry level position at a mining company, they were looking at the employment of local people, and I don't know the truth figure, but they were saying that most people weren't able to get a position because they didn't have a Class C license to drive a vehicle. Something as simple as that, just a license. So when we go about that, including, as Raylene was saying, starting early, starting to consult how to build up the capability, that's the opportunity to find where, the touch points, how can we upskill? Because something as simple as that is a pretty easy fix. Ideally, it's an easy fix, but it just almost compounds into a very big issue, because the opportunity's there, but the door's just not opening because it seems like no one else is opening it.
And for such a small issue as well as a license, to then miss out on employment, on income, and we all know that usually supports bigger families. It's not just one person that has an impact on. I worked with Transport New South Wales for a while, and they had a really great license program. And I think they realised quickly, that would open doors for that, because a lot of infrastructure in New South Wales and roads and all of those things. And it was an easy, inclusive mechanisms, because same issue, finding that a lot of Aboriginal people needed a license, and it was kind of like, well, how do we solve this? And started a driver's licensing program. And I think that's the beauty of partnership as well, and thinking a little outside the box. Like, yes, everyone's banging on about growth and jobs, but how do you make things holistic? And I think that's how our people think as well when we engage in these different things that are happening on country. We think about the whole picture, not just transaction and what is this quick, immediate fix opportunity? It's bigger than that.
Yeah, I think, I've seen a lot of times where they've had major projects, like you say, the early engagement at the beginning, but doesn't happen. These big companies are winning these projects. They put all this information in there that they're going to do all this employment and business and whatever. And it's a real shame when they end up getting those projects and nothing happens. Like, you've got a big project that's happening for 3 years in a community, and the engagement doesn't happen, because then they come across all the barriers, the reason why they can't do it. So, and there's got to be a lot of thought up front. And I've said this many times to the government departments over here, when you're putting your tenders out, this is when you have it all in there. You identify all the opportunities, and you set them aside so that First Nations people are going to get those opportunities. Because if you just hand those big projects over to those companies, they'll say what they're going to do on these projects, but when the rubber hits the road, it doesn't happen because they'll come up with all the barriers and all the reasons why they can't do it. So that early engagement, getting people prepared, it just makes good sense, to be able to engage the local traditional owner people in those communities. And especially when you're out in the regions where you're trying to empower people, and it makes good sense in the fact that they're already there, so you don't have to bring people in from out of town. So that sort of puts the strain on bringing people in there when there's out in the regions where they've got housing issues and people flying in and out. That all impacts the climate as well. All these planes flying in and out. So it's about thinking smarter out on these projects. And renewables are no different. They're going to be big projects when they hit the ground, and we've got to really be involved and working, like I keep saying, at the table in the partnership, having some ownership. It's simple as that. It's not a hard thing to do. It's it's on our country. They're on our country, so it's important that it happens.
I think there has been some progress in, like the IPP, in like Indigenous procurement policy, with creating targets and things. But what I find is usually missing, and this is in the social space as well, the not-for-profit sector, social enterprise sector. You look at a lot of environmental programs or biodiversity initiatives, even research. There's a lot of research that is done, and there's usually a almost a superficial kind of, oh, make sure you engage a First Nations group. And it's like, well, what does that mean though? What does that look like in practicality? And where is the accountability around that? Like, how are you doing that in a measured way that is inclusive? Are you seeking to, or are you aiming for co-design? Are you looking for an ongoing inclusive relationship because you're trying to make an impact? So I think, yeah, it keeps coming back to that partnership piece. There's so much opportunity to partner and co-design and reap the benefits of that, the long-term meaningful impact and sustainable benefits.
Yeah, and I'm saying, and when it's co-design, it's got to be co-design. The Aboriginal people really need to be leading it. So, I'm working with a group out in the Goldfield now who's are starting to set up their women's group, and they're doing partnerships with the CSIRO and the university, and then you're sort of hearing other organisations saying, "Oh, how are they going to do this? And what are they going to do here? How are they going to do this?" And I'm thinking, where's the collaboration? Where's the this is great. How can we help them? It's not knocking the people. It's about getting out there and helping them as well. So, this has also got to happen, because I've seen this many times where the government talks about self-determination, empowerment for our people. Well, that has to happen on these big projects, and the collaboration has to happen, and complementary services. It's about, getting out there and working with them and give them a go. Over time, we haven't had those opportunities, and I feel that we can't keep the same old rhetoric talk about doing it. It's got to happen. But to me, it's these projects, the co-design will need to be, sitting with the community, working with them, not, the proponent dictating what the co-design is and running the show as well. So that's going to be a really important and going to be challenging to see how that works.
Any other thoughts, Tyson? Or should we move on to the next question?
I'll move to the next.
Yeah. The finance. So what role do you think finance plays in enabling or undermining First Nations climate solutions? I'll start with you, Tyson.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, finance is the money. And it gets things moving. It gets the signatures happening. It gets everything sort of going. And that's all great and sense, but come with it, there needs to be the accountability. It's almost like, I'm lending you this money because you told me that you're going to invest in the community, you're going to have this program, you're going to be doing this stuff. I want to know that what I'm investing in is what you're going to do, and if not, I'm not going to invest anymore. And so that's the real power element, is that you can kind of sort of dictate sort of thing. I don't invest in anything, so I'm not saying from experience, but the idea of it, you can see it moving. During my time at uni, I was able to write a journal article on what corporate law mechanisms could better enforce RAP plans, and you're looking at the RAP plans and the supply diversity and the opportunities to invest in these communities, and you see it there with the maybe the purpose of investing in the communities are there, but it doesn't happen. And you see the flip side of that is that First Nations businesses who invest in themselves, their workforce, upskill, they get ready for these opportunities, and it just doesn't come through. And so that's why the accountability piece as well. When you look at the climate, you're looking at sort of what projects are they investing in, what are they doing. At the end of the day, we're consumers, so we've got to be able to have flex our consumer sort of spend.
The buying power.
Yeah, the buying power. It's something as small. I was with Optus, for example, and recently they were found to engage in unconscionable sort of dealings. So I changed to Telstra, who was also not as good as well. So, but it's just, even though I'm one, well, maybe 1% of consumers change their mind. At least we have to try to keep them accountable.
Well, finance, to me, as you know, my background's in finance. It's going to be important for our people to be able to, create some wealth through these opportunities. I think that's really, really important. I mean, like I said earlier, when mining came, it's been around for, I don't know how long, but I was living in the Pilbara in the 80s, and there was mines up there then, back in the late 80s, and our people weren't even working. I remember BHP had 3 Aboriginal people working for them in 1987, 88.
Wow.
And that's not long ago, really, when you think of it. And when you look at it now, so, it's been so important for our people to be able to get into that space where they can create wealth, where they can, buy their homes and educate their children and, be independent, live like everybody else in this country. So I think that's really important for us. The only other worry is for us is having in finance for, when these big renewables come, we're going to be wanting to become equity partners and whatever. That could be a bit of a problem for us to find these partners and investors. So that's something that we've got to really, research and find out how we're going to do that. That's important for us because, like I said, we need to have buy-in on these projects. They're on country. So when we talk about caring for country, if we're at the table, if we have equity in those projects, we have a say. We have a say on the country. So, you don't go there, you can't build here. That's such and such place, So, and we have a say. We want to employ our people. We want our people to have business. So that's the only way forward is to have ownership and equity into those projects. And, but my concern is, not enough is known out there. If you go out in a community, they would not even know and understand how are we going to be involved? Where are we going to get the money from? So, it's really important to understand, well, how do people buy into these big projects? Like, not everybody's got billions of dollars that they can just drop into a project. So there are things such as investors and, the banks and, you name it, so I think that's going to be a concern for us in going forward, and how are we supported in that space.
Yeah, and I think as frustrating as it is, money is power. This year again for COP30, the finance is front and centre. How much are we all investing into climate action? But I think, we always hear about the trickle-down effect and, all of that. But for me and some of the work that we've been doing, it's what are the mechanisms that level the playing field? Australia saw the Sustainable Finance Taxonomy launched this year, and to label any finance to a project green, a range of criteria needs to be met. And part of that was incorporating First Nations criteria, minimum social safeguards for First Nations communities and peoples, and, you know, looking to other frameworks like, or international frameworks like the United Nations Declaration for Rights on Indigenous People, one of the most comprehensively developed frameworks out. And that goes into principles such as self-determination, incorporating or thinking about or trying to adopt processes like free, prior, and informed consent. What does that look like when engaging with traditional owners? But I think on the other side, as traditional owners, what are our priorities, our aspirations? What does our governance look like for our own people and our country? And how do we set our own standards so that whoever is engaging us, especially when we have assets like land, and especially when the likes of investors are wanting to fund different things, different projects on our land, or different programs or different work, even research, what are our terms that we can, you know, have a bit of power back and determine what actually happens on country and with our people? And I think it comes back to data as well. Who's in control of all the data that goes around that's informing a lot of these decisions, especially when you think of investment? How do we make sure that we have a controlling aspect around that? Because it's always about us. Mm.
Well, I think it's important that, you know, any partnerships we have and any proponents that are coming on our company, the first thing they need to have First Nations governance framework alignment, you know, throughout their organisations, and that, you know, should be co-designed with us, you know, with First Nations people, because, you know, they can't just come in, a company from overseas, and land on our country and think that they can do what they like. It's just unethical. Things have to change, and we have to be, like I said, we've got to be a part of it, and that's really important. And I know, Bec, you do a lot of stuff in this governance, and I think it's so important to embed all that into any organisation that we're partnering with.
Yeah, and it's standards. It's minimum standards. I think everywhere. How do you engage? Why are you going to engage with TOs? What's the end goal? How do you make sure that that's inclusive and that you're thinking about, you know, thinking outside of the box? We talked about employment. There's more than that. Maybe it's health services. Maybe it's we're wanting to fund, like, native seeds are becoming a huge area, like their own sector at the moment. And a lot of our people around, especially out on country, that's another opportunity for us to manage and to be out there. So,
well, Bec, I look at the Pilbara realistically. You know, there's billions and billions of dollars come out of the Pilbara. You know, there could be a lot more infrastructure. There could be a lot more stuff in that Pilbara left behind by those mining companies, but it's not happening. We've still got FIFO people. You know, that's not even good for our people. Mums and dads leaving their children for 2 weeks at a time. You know, it needs to be creating that sustainable building capacity and community as well. It can't be just all about money, taking all that money and just giving it to shareholders. And most of them, a majority of them, are from overseas. Like, seriously, we've got to change things. This is important to our people, to all the people in this country. But, you know, First Nations people, you know, we're missing out. I see that the mining in the Pilbara, the traditional owners aren't even being rewarded, compensated properly for what's happening up there now. It's done a lot of damage with a lot of the traditional owners in the Pilbara. You know, it's created a lot of divide because of the way they operate and the way, you know, it's all set up with this royalties scheme. So it's got to be a better way, definitely.
Yeah. I'll finish up with one more question around wellbeing, because I think that's important. How do we protect cultural integrity and social connection in the face of rising climate pressures and all the things we've talked about, all the infrastructure, the financing that we're seeing, like the Pacific, and the impacts, the very real, tangible impacts, but then there's all the other ones. So how do we protect cultural integrity and social connection in the face of all of those pressures?
I think being a part of the consultation all the conversation about what's happening on country and the well-being sort of pieces that the well-being is strongly tied to the responsibility to protect sacred sites or sites of significance, caring for country, but also it's that ability to build the community development and the economic development in that community and the flow-on effect as well, because boots on the ground, they know where the resources need to go, and that sometimes the head office is in the big city in Perth or on the East Coast, but there's no connection to what's actually happening on the ground. So starting that very early and understanding the lay of the land will enable the local community members, First Nations people, to actually have a sense of well-being, because they're being asked, they're informing the project, they're taking their cultural responsibility on as well by making sure everything is done right, and they're sort of discharging their ethical duties, well, not really duties, but, and again, if you translate that to board of directors or the executive management, the challenge is now with the rising climate is that the duty of care piece, even though that part is not recognised in Australian law yet, but if you turn it to a social licence, even though you got the approvals to be there and you can mine or do your project, if you don't have the social licence, then good luck, because no one's going to be wanting to work with you. So everything's interconnected after that word salad, and that's the wellbeing piece.
I loved the mention of duty of care. Isn't there a juicy case going on at the moment with a director of a major, and it could possibly change the game for director responsibilities and duty of care? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think some of the details were that a director knew of a risk and, they were informed, but then still went ahead and decided against it. And obviously it blew up, and now it's about whether that individual can be held responsible for the decision that they made. And especially when you think of influence and power, back again to power dynamics, what does that all mean and what does that look like? So, whereas I think traditionally it's been the company, or all liability and responsibility to come back to the company rather than directors to a degree.
Just very quickly for the audience, if you're interested in that sort of climate reporting and director duties, it's Noel Huntley SC and Sebastian Hartford Davis, and they wrote opinion pieces on how if a director doesn't turn their mind to climate risk, what are their risks for ignoring it or not addressing it. I feel like the times have gone where no due diligence is looked into the risk. Set and forget, that doesn't exist well. In this day and age, everything's evolving. You have to turn your mind to it, and you have to make an assessment. Because I feel like if you don't make an assessment, you'll be in more trouble than you do.
Brilliant.
I think Bec too. I think that it's about equity of access too, ensuring that happens. That people in the community are all inclusive. And there's inclusiveness and buy-in, because I've seen it. Way back when we had native title, where that didn't happen, and then that created a lot of havoc in our communities. And we still see that today, where people aren't understood. If something's going to happen on country, I would like to see nearly 100% people behind it. I know we're not going to get that, because we're going to get a lot of our people that will definitely oppose it, because they care so much about country. They just don't want any big infrastructure project sitting on their country. So that's going to happen. But at least if they've been informed and they've had able to have their say, because it does create a lot of issues later on down the track. And we've seen that. And it's actually broken my heart to see now, even today, from native title, the way that was rolled out over 30 years, and not informed, people not informed, not inclusive, not being able to have their say because they don't have access to be able to get to a meeting or whatever. That created a lot of havoc with our people because they haven't been able to contribute and their voices weren't heard. So it's really important that happens, this process happens. But right now, I know that there's renewables. I was talking to people yesterday and they said, oh my God, you go up to the Midwest now, there's renewables everywhere. So I didn't even know these are happening. So, they're happening and people don't know. And all of a sudden, it's like, it's like getting your next door neighbours just move in. It's happening, you don't know.
And I think back to the first point you made, it's the who. We've had this conversation quite a lot. When you think about cultural authority and, cultural authority in some of our communities, and the right people aren't being consulted or engaged, rather it's someone that's loud or with a profile or is in a particular position with a company. And then that engagement is used as cultural license. And it that's so much risk it creates for the project, for community. And so it's about understanding who is the right person in community to engage.
Well, it's also, we're all equal. We are all holders. And this is what I say all the time. Yes, we have elders, but and we have that respect, and but we are all equal on this because it's going to impact all of us, and even down to the young ones. It's their land, because in the future they're going to be left. When we go, they're going to be the right people. So it's about making sure equity of access, that everybody gets to be able to, if they want their voice to be heard, that they get that opportunity. Because to me, yes, it's happening and it's not right, and it has created a lot of animosity in the community, and it's still going on, and it's sad because that's not the way of Aboriginal people, to be arguing and have grudges over all these things that have been imposed on us, So I think it's important that equity of access is up front at the beginning, and everybody gets the opportunity to have their voice.
Rapid fire, we've got a few minutes left. Rapid fire, we've had a great question come through. Do you think consultation is too business as usual when it comes to projects? I would be screaming yes.
Yes.
Okay.
At this stage, definitely. But and my background working in a credit union many years ago, First Nations. I'll just tell you this little story. I came from a bank, working in a bank. First, not many Aboriginal people in the day worked in the banks, and I started the credit union. When I went out to community to do anything, to see somebody about a loan, it wasn't, I would go straight in there and sit down and say, let's do the loan. It would be about having that consultation about, everything but the loan, and, building that relationship, talking about everything else. And that's the way Aboriginal people do business, and the banks were, oh, why are you taking so long to go out there and see somebody? And I'd say, well, I have to talk to people, do they trust me? They're not going to trust me because I'm coming out here and just going to do a loan with them. It's about building that relationship, building that rapport, and that is important to us. And yes,
doing it the right way. Yeah. Tyson?
That's what I was leaning towards, is that it's depending on how you do consultation. Up in Headlands, I've heard stories of where big mining execs have rocked up to sign a Illawarra, which is the Indigenous Land Use Agreement, or a native title, and they set aside, they've flown up from Perth that morning and expecting to sign and go, this is our first meeting together. We're going to have a cup of tea, we're going to have a chat, we're in the community hall. I want to show you my country. So it depends how you do the consultation. And I feel like over time it evolves, and challenge yourself about, I would like to go to your country and actually have it on there. And don't put an hour, at least put 3 hours, because we love a good
go for a week.
And may I just mention, Bec, one thing that we really need to touch on is when we are doing all this negotiations, we need help with power imbalance. We cannot have these big wigs flying into town with all their heavy lawyers sitting down at a table with many of our people with not understanding all, you know, the economics of this big project. And that's been happening far too long, where there's been a big power imbalance, and you know, the pushing to get this project happening. And so that's going to be really important as well. How do we make sure that we get that support when these proposals are coming towards us and helping us navigate ourselves through them as well? That's you know, it's been happening forever and a day, and that really has to be looked at and supported for us Aboriginal people.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
There's one more question here, and I've got to hand back to Cheryl as well. But quickly, Greg, that's a great question. COP31, strong chance of being in Australia. I feel like Australia especially has a really great chance to spotlight all the incredible things that First Nations in our country are doing. Things like Fire Sticks, who are doing cultural burning, you know, when it comes to climate change and mitigating. Things like the Desert Alliance, we've invested in Aboriginal rangers all over the country who are doing amazing work. I think things like policy development, we're trying to come up with innovative solutions that put that prioritise First Nations rights and interests. And back to the sustainable finance taxonomy, we're the first country globally. There's about 50 globally. We were the first to include First Nations criteria. So I think we have a huge opportunity to spotlight all the great stuff that is First Nations led and owned, and how we are supporting and elevating the First Peoples of this country. Cheryl.
Thanks so much, Bec, Tyson, and Raylene, for such an honest, critical, frank conversation and call to action, and a necessary call to action for the social enterprise sector and for all business. Oh my gosh, I was taking notes. I had so many takeaways. You know, a few of the key ones around corporate behaviour and director accountability has to change, you know, and that the opportunity is there for business to be good partners with First Nations peoples and communities, to co-design with Aboriginal leadership, Aboriginal ownership, and an ongoing inclusive relationship. Really loved your call to action that we have to think about the whole picture, take a holistic view beyond that, you know, short-term fix, and we need to consider well-being for the social ecology as well as the natural ecology. Raylene, you spoke with such power around ensuring equity of access for First Nations people, and ensuring that they're at the table from the beginning of a project and through every stage of it. So thank you, mountains of gratitude to all of you. And thanks also to everyone who took the time to join us online today. We really appreciate your time, your interest in this conversation, and your commitment to turning this learning into action. So thank you, Bec, Tyson, Raylene, mountains of gratitude. Take care. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
You.
Bye.
Bye.